Hello, good afternoon. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jonathan Council, Group Head of Sustainability at IAG. And apart from my day job, I also chair the Jet Zero Council Sustainable Aviation Fuel Delivery Group, which is the UK government industry partnership to accelerate sustainable aviation fuels here in the UK. In addition, I also sit on the Council of Sustainable Aviation, which is the UK Aviation Consortium driving delivery of net zero emissions here in the UK. First of all, what I'll do is just give you a snapshot of IAG, the International Airlines Group. So this slide here shows the size of our business. We are one of the largest airlines in the world. We have 5 airlines in Spain, UK and Ireland, and also 3 supporting businesses. And I'm very happy to say that after the very challenging period of the pandemic, we have now returned to profitability and we are on track to return to our pre-pandemic levels. As you know, we are a hard to decarbonize sector, but we're also one of the most important. Aviation globally supports 88 million jobs and some $3.5 trillion of gross domestic product. And we are fully committed to reducing our CO2 emissions. We are the only sector that has made a global commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 by both industry and governments. And we have robust plans to deliver to these commitments, where one of our priorities will be sustainable aviation fuels. And it's today that I want to talk to you in some more detail about these fuels. But first of all, let me explain what are sustainable aviation fuels. So essentially, they are jet fuel, the difference being they are made from sustainable feedstocks using innovative and advanced technologies. And I'll explain a bit more about that as we go through. So this slide helps explain the role that we'll see SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuels, playing and helping us to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. It's a busy slide, so let me talk through what we're showing here. Across the top, we have the timelines from 2020 today, essentially through to 2050. And then down the side, we have the different types of flying activity. And we differentiate these generally by the length of a flight. So at the top, you can see we have commuter flights, which are generally less than 1 hour, through to regional, between 1 and 1.5 hours, short haul, typically less than 2 hours, and then medium and long haul. Long haul, generally everything over 2.5 hours. In aviation, we say we need everything to help achieve net zero emissions. And you can see that for essentially the shorter missions of flying, we're looking at hydrogen powered aircraft or electric powered aircraft. So you can see for commuter flights, we expect these to come to service from 2025. And then for the longer flight paths, they'll take a slightly longer, with short haul coming in from the mid-2030s. But let me focus on sustainable aviation fuel. So the two important elements there. SAF is the only thing that is available in any significant way today. But more importantly, it is the only viable solution that we see for medium and long haul flying. And as you can see on this chart, those two together represent over 70% of aviation's emissions. So the majority of our emissions will only be covered by sustainable aviation fuels. Why are these the only viable solution? Essentially because they have very high energy density. SAF is 4 times more energy dense than, say, hydrogen or electric power technology, which is why it makes them viable for these longer missions. And the strength of sustainable aviation fuels is there's not just one type. Altogether today, there are 8 different approved pathways using different feedstocks and production pathways. And as an industry, at IAG and industry, we are fully committed that we will only use sustainable feedstocks to deliver at least 70% emissions reductions over fossil fuel. And very importantly, we will not use any resources that take away from food production. So only the most sustainable feedstocks. Here you can see some of the examples of the kind of feedstocks we're talking about. Essentially, they're waste products that could normally be discarded, incinerated, or even put into landfill. In the UK alone, we send over 15 million tonnes a year of waste to landfill. and this can instead be used to create sustainable aviation fuels. So having two important benefits. And then longer term, we talk about e-fuels, often called power to liquids, or sometimes they're called synthetic fuels. These are essentially sustainable fuels that are made from capturing CO2 from the atmosphere, combined with green hydrogen to make a fuel that is 100% lower emissions than fossil jet fuel. Let me talk about targets. At IAG, we're very proud to be the first airline group in the world to commit to net zero emissions by 2050, which we did back in October 2019. But for us, this is very much the start point. We see climate change as an industry challenge. So it's very important that we get the whole industry to commit to these ambitious targets. So we're very happy to see UK Aviation, our One World Alliance, and then the whole aviation industry also commit to this ambition at their annual general meeting in October 2021. And then back in October last year, the 195 member states of the United Nations ICAO General Assembly also made this commitment. So worth reiterating, I have said it before, but we are the only sector that has made a global commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 at both industry and government level. And now the focus is very much on delivering to that commitment. And as I've said, sustainable aviation fuels will play an absolutely critical role there. And to accelerate this, we committed to 10% SAF by 2030, and we're the first European airline to do that. What does 10% mean to us? That means 1 million tons of SAF by 2030. Now, when he made this commitment back in April 2021, 1 million tons represented approximately 10 times the entire global supply of SAF. So it was quite a big step up. But we're confident we can achieve this because of the momentum we've seen around the world, both in introducing policy support and getting investment to build SAF plants. Now, let me explain this chart again. It's quite busy, so I'll spend some time talking through it. This chart essentially explains how we'll deliver all the mechanisms that will enable us to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. So along the horizontal, we have the timeline to 2050. Along the vertical, it's tons of carbon dioxide, and we essentially talk about 4 key elements that will enable us to hit that target. And let me just briefly talk through each of those in turn. So from the top, the dark blue wedge, that represents emissions reduction from aircraft and engine technology, and that includes hybrid electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft. The next wedge, the light grey wedge, that's sustainable aviation fuels. And that's where the priority focus has been and will be, as this is the element that is going to significantly enable us to achieve this long-term target. So much so that by 2050, we believe that 70% of all our fuels will be using sustainable aviation fuels. However, we recognise that in this time frame, we will need to invest in emissions reductions outside of our sector. So while our priority is to go as far as we can, which is indicated by that yellow line, so that yellow line is the emissions reduction within our sector, we will need to invest in reductions outside of aviation. So this is described by the pink and blue wedges. So the pink wedge essentially is the investment we'll make in carbon offsets through our global United Nations scheme called CORSIA, the Carbon Offsetting and Reduction Scheme for International Aviation. And it's worth saying we will only invest in the most robust and sustainable offsets through that scheme. However, we recognise that as they become available, we will want to transition away from offsets to use carbon removals. So that's described by the light blue chart, wedge in the chart there. And we fully expect that as they become available, we'll accelerate investment in carbon removals. And certainly by 2050, we will only be investing in removals as opposed to offsets. So now, let me now talk about where are we in terms of developing SAF capacity around the world. So as I mentioned, there is a lot of activity. We believe with the right policy support, we can get to 10% SAF globally. What does 10% mean globally? It's 30 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel. We will need over 300 plants, but importantly, we will need $250 billion of capital to get those plants built. Now, a lot of activity worldwide, but it's fair to say that the United States is very much leading in this regard, essentially because they have implemented a very attractive set of policies. They've also committed to 15% SAF by 2030. And as I say, they have a very set of attractive policies, really supplemented by the recent Biden Inflation Reduction Act, which makes the US by far and away the most attractive place in the world to invest in SAF capacity. The EU and the UK have made some moves here, so there's some very attractive policy moves, but currently they're not sufficient on their own to attract investment. So we do need to see more there, which I'll talk about if we're going to get plants built here in UK and Europe. And specifically, we think there is an opportunity here in the UK. So this chart was produced by, I mentioned, the UK Aviation Consortium Sustainable Aviation. And essentially, this outlines where we believe there is potential in the UK. So with the right policy support, we think we could build 14 SAF plants in these 7 locations in the next 10 years. And you can see there are different types of SAF, and they provide significant economic and jobs benefits in each of those locations. In total, we think if we can get to these 14 plants, that will deliver an extra permanent 6,500 jobs and deliver £2 billion a year of economic benefit, saving some 3 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. As I mentioned, the US is leading the way. The first dedicated SAF plant is already up and running in Nevada. This picture here shows the second dedicated SAF plant. This is being built in Georgia. It's with in our view, the world's leading SAF company, LanzaJet, who we are very proud to have a partnership with, and also an agreement to have SAF supplied from this very plant, which will be producing by the end of this year. So have I said that the US definitely has the most attractive package of policy support. The UK has also supported and committed to 10% SAF by 2030, and that mandate will be implemented from 2025. So what is it we need to see this opportunity exploited here in the UK? So as well as the mandates that have already been committed to, we need some sort of price stability mechanism. So something like a contracts for difference. This has been very successfully implemented here in the UK, and it's been the enabler to building the highly successful UK offshore wind industry. So something like that, we believe, will enable us to attract the funding to get SAF plants built in the UK. Green grants, they are important, particularly during the high risk phase of development for projects. So we really welcome the UK government's commitment to provide £165 million of grant support to essentially enable the funding of those initial plants and meet the commitment of the first 5 plants in construction by 2025. And on the important question, how are we going to fund these mechanisms? We've always said that the SAF industry doesn't need any taxpayers' money. It can be privately funded. And to support this contracts for difference type instrument, we think you can resource the revenues from the UK emissions trading scheme. So again, we're not asking for any subsidies or revenues from the taxpayer. This can be industry funded. So in summary, aviation has come a long way. Our carbon efficiency continues to improve every year. At IAG alone, we have 7,400 managers that are directly incentivized to improve our carbon efficiency. Modern jet planes, well, they're over 80% more fuel efficient than the first planes back in the 1960s. But there remains much more to do to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Sustainable aviation fuel is the area where we can and must make progress. And with the right policy support, the UK has a real opportunity to be a true leader on the SAF agenda and help create a truly sustainable aviation industry. So thank you for joining me, and we hope to see many of you on one of our flights soon.